Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Tony Bell, and my company is Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy, and we provide synergistic solutions to nonprofit organizations. What I'm going to be talking about today is diversifying funding streams for nonprofits, because so many nonprofits in today's environment are really operating with all of their eggs in one basket, and have been for many years, and struggle with what are the appropriate ways and the appropriate avenues to go down in order to diversify funding. So in your folder, actually there are two handouts. One of them is about funding and infrastructure. And that's really the first thing that nonprofits need to think about when you start talking about how are we going to diverse our funding. What are we going to do different tomorrow than what we're doing today? And you have to first look at the infrastructure. And really, in my recommendation, in my experience, is the first thing you need to do is to take a look at your board of directors. And how engaged are your board of directors in your fundraising? So let me ask you, out of the nonprofits here, how many of you need to raise more funds? I figured as much. And let me ask, how many of you feel like you have a good, diverse funding stream currently? Okay, good. Then this will be a really good conversation. Mary, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick on you just for a minute. Tell us a little bit about how Starlight raises its money.
Starlight's main foundation for its fundraising is very much in our events. So it's very event-focused, without a major donor program, without planned giving, and some other major revenue streams that we need to develop.
Excellent. And Barry already knew what my next question was going to be, which was going to be, what do you think are some of the areas where you could diversify funding? And you're right. I mean, planned giving is certainly one of them, and certainly one that a lot of nonprofits struggle with wrapping their arms around. But grant writing is certainly one that could start right away for your organization, where you guys would probably see some results. And then let me ask out of the nonprofits that are here, how many of you have board of directors that are heavily engaged in your fundraising? Okay, well that's good. That's good that you do, because again, the success of the organization really starts with that core group of leadership. And do you mind my asking, with your nonprofit, what was your nonprofit again? Food for the Poor. And does your board of directors have a give or get clause in the bylaws that says, no? Okay. Yeah, there's still some controversy around that. A lot of nonprofits have moved to that structure so that in their bylaws it says that if you're going to serve on this board of directors, you have a give or get responsibility to this organization, meaning you are either personally responsible for giving X number of dollars or getting X number of dollars for the organization. A lot of nonprofits have transitioned to that. The board struggles with that concept. The important thing there is really to give them the tools necessary so that they know how to go out and get the funds for the organization. That's more important at the end of the day than them actually personally giving, because if they go out and get, now you have that relationship to nurture, and if the board member transitions off the board, you're not losing that relationship with that particular donor. So this is just a little takeaway for you to take a look at what do you need to do in terms of infrastructure when you start thinking about how you're going to diversify your funding. Because like anything that we do, the infrastructure is really important for the sustainability of our success. So I wanted to share that with you. Any questions so far? Great. The other thing that's in there is a fund diversification model. It's a very, very simple tool to use. Make copies of it when you get back to the office. But typically what I do with clients is we sit down and go through this process with the executive director and with the director of development, if you're fortunate enough to have a director of development. I know in a lot of scenarios the executive director is everything. But usually what we do with this, and like I said, it's really a fun exercise for you, is, think about what is it that your organization needs to raise. And I usually write that at the top in big, big numbers. This is what we need to raise. And then it's basically a pie chart, and you're going to break down your revenue streams. So on this line, the top line, for example, you may put down, in Mary's case for Starlight, special events, and maybe they're bringing in, X number of dollars. So then you're going to take a look at what your gap is and come up with other funding areas and create your giving pie so that special events are no longer 80% of your revenue stream. So you're kind of, baking your pie to include the other funding ingredients that you need in order to diversify your funding. And then from there, you work on what those strategies are going to be. So that's why I say, make a bunch of copies of this so that you can play around, you can make a lot of different pies until you come up with the one that is right for your organization. And then from there, determine what those strategies are going to be. So again, going back to Mary, if you decide that the greatest opportunity in terms of diversifying your funding is going to be grants, then, okay, what are we going to do to fulfill that strategy? Do we have the resources internally to take care of that? Do we need to outsource the grant writing? If we give board members some additional education, can board members take on that responsibility? And that leads into the other thing that I wanted to say too about boards is that a lot of times boards are there primarily for governance, and that we forget about the other important roles that they need to play. And we also forget that board members are just like employees. They need continuing education as well. So board members need to be consistently re-educated, if not to learn new things, to at least reaffirm that what they're doing is correct. But it's important that they no longer just sit in a boardroom and govern the organization, but that they're actually out there engaged as ambassadors and getting their continuing education as well. The other thing about diversifying funding streams is if one of the things that you need to do, because I work with a lot of nonprofits that are pretty grant heavy in their funding. So the whole idea of implementing special events is pretty frightening to them. But actually, it's a pretty simple process. But when you look at what are the events that you want to implement, think about your community. Take a look at what is already going on within your community, because you don't want to create events that are going to be direct competitors of other things happening in the marketplace. And I'll give you a good example. One of my clients is entering the mass marketing event arena. They've never done a mass market event. And typically a mass market event is defined as an event like a walk-a-thon or a bike-a-thon. Anything that's going to bring masses of individuals to a location to raise funds for your organization. So they decided, because the passion for the board members who are getting involved in this is anything to do with fitness. So we knew right away that they were going to either go down a walk-a-thon route or wanted to do a triathlon or some type of bike tour. So what we ended up deciding on at the end of the day was a walk-a-thon. One, because that's an easier mass market event to implement in terms of logistics. But then we had the conversation, okay, we're going to do this walk-a-thon, but we need to do something that doesn't make it like every other walk-a-thon that every other nonprofit does in the marketplace. So we put on our thinking caps and we came up with what is now their Fitness Walk and Family Festival. So what's going to happen at this particular walk-a-thon, instead of it being your standard 5K, this is a 2-mile walk route, so pretty short in comparison to what most walk-a-thons look like. But along the walk route, there are going to be 8 boot camp stations that are manned by Orange Theory, which is the latest, hottest gym in town. So that's what they decided to do. That's going to make that mass market event unique. So it's a shorter walk route, but guests are going to have the opportunity to experience these 8 different boot camp locations along the route. So again, just coming up with that thing that makes the event something that people recognize, because when you hear walk-a-thon, you get it, you understand it, but it adds that extra component that's really going to make your event stand out compared to what other nonprofits are doing in the marketplace. So I just wanted to share that with you, that when you decide on what that diversification looks like, what are those additional revenue-producing opportunities that you're going to go after, make sure that they're creative and make sure that they're events or initiatives that are going to be embraced by your community. And don't be afraid to pull together focus groups of volunteers pull together focus groups of volunteers or clients and board members. Pull folks in a room and talk about your ideas and what you're looking to achieve and get their feedback. Because ultimately, you're going to be looking towards those board members and those volunteers to help you get the word out about the event and to be your ambassadors, out on the street for your cause. Again, funding is really important for organizations. Board engagement is very important for your organizations. I, again, work with a lot of nonprofits that are grant heavy, and this year in particular, unfortunately, a lot of them have seen a tremendous decrease in that grant funding. So when they lose 30 to 40% of their funding, well, guess what? There's 30% or 40% of staff or 30 or 40% of programming. So if you go ahead and start working now to diversify your funding so that you have more unrestricted funds, and that's really what this is all about, is diversifying your funds so that you have more unrestricted funding to use on those initiatives that are really important to your organization or to the communities that that you're meant to serve. We talked